Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. My name is Sarah Stanchek, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the FBI Association of Intelligence Analysts. And I'm thrilled to be kicking off this panel briefly today, but I just wanted to let everyone know that this will be recorded. So if you have any concerns with that, would just ask that you log off now and we will send the recording to you after the fact. But I'm here to just kick off the panel. So good morning, afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. So this panel discussion about transitioning from the government to the private sector is being hosted by the FBI Association of Intelligence Analysts. Thank you all for joining us, and special thank you to Sarah Saenz and the rest of the panel for really holding this event and spending a lot of care and time and effort to curate a lot of really great talking points and tidbits and advice and pro tips essentially for all of our watchers and listeners. A little bit about the FBI AIA. So our mission is to advance the careers of public and private sector intelligence analysts through mentoring, networking, and advocacy. So that is a huge part of our panel today. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick it off to Sarah Saenz, who is moderating this panel, and take it away. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coordinating this effort and for being a wonderful member and leader of the FBI AIA.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. As she mentioned, my name is Sarah Saenz, and I'm a member of the FBI AIA. I'm also Vice President of Cybersecurity Partnerships and Industry Engagement at Citibank. Prior to Citi, I was at the FBI for more than 13 years, where I started as an intelligence analyst and then transitioned to different roles, working community outreach, international operations, and partner engagement. I'm excited for this awesome panel. So I want to get started and introduce our three dynamic panelists that we have very diverse backgrounds from government. We have a former FBI intelligence analyst, Nikki Ruttman, a former FBI special agent, Mike Orlando, and a former CIA case officer, Ben Fowle. Mike, I'm going to start with you, just if you can give us a little bit background about yourself, and then we'll go to Ben and Nikki.
Sure. Hello, everyone. First, thanks for having me here today. I'm happy to be talking to the group. My background, so starting with, I'm the Senior Director for Global Physical Security, Internal Trust and Protection, and the Intelligence Program at Micron Technologies. As you mentioned, I was a career FBI Special Agent. Most of my background was in counterintelligence. My senior executive time was in counterterrorism, and then I finished up my career at the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. And one thing I'd like to flag about that is that at about 3 years, I knew I was going to transition out of government at that time. And I purposely went to the center because I knew I was going to be able to grow my network outside the FBI and that it had a private sector outreach. And so I strategically thought about those things. And then last, I also worked at CIA and I was a former military person. And so I was able to leverage all that from my intelligence, my veteran status, my counterintelligence times, and my time in counterterrorism to make that marketable for the private sector.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Ben, we'll go to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Fowle. I was in the agency and the State Department for a little bit over 18 years and did 6 tours overseas as case officer. Currently, I work at Applied Intuition, where I lead BD efforts with industry primes. It's a software company that has various solutions for autonomous vehicles. Before that, I worked at Palantir, specifically on Project Maven. My transition out of government, I don't think was as seamless as Mike's. I was trying to be strategic, but at the same time, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and probably just approached it like a case officer in general, just trying to penetrate organizations and figure out how to navigate myself towards something meaningful. But along the way, realized the importance of networking, and I hope to be able to share some of those insights with you all so that you can get after it and land where you deserve.
Thank you, Ben. I think we can certainly relate to that. And then Nikki.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm having lots of technical issues, so
Yes,
we're good.
Awesome.
Good. Nikki Ruttman. I, much like Benjamin, had no idea when or if I'd be transitioning out of government into the private sector until it happened, but I started looking about 2 years before I actually made the leap, and that was primarily because it took me a while to figure out where I wanted to land. I have about 19 years in the intelligence community between the Defense Intelligence Agency and the FBI. My last duty station was in the Boston field office in one of the RAs, and worked in the liaison capacity at the ODNI in that time frame as well. And touch pretty much every program I think that the Bureau has in the course of my career, and started actually in the Defense Intelligence Agency working in counterintelligence as well. So I am now with Moderna, where I was hired in 2022 to build out its intelligence program from the ground up, and also tapped about a year ago to build out a cyber threat intelligence program as well. It is my first private sector role, and I'm sure we'll get to this in the course of the panel. Hopefully able to give some light at the end of the tunnel, that when you hear from the jobs you're applying for that we want someone with private sector experience, don't worry, you will eventually get that first private sector job, and hopefully these tips will help you, and then hopefully it gets easier after that. But thank you again, happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you all for being on this panel today. Amazing backgrounds. I think we can all agree this is going to be a worthwhile discussion. One of the main reasons we're hosting this event is because the mission of the organization is to share our lessons and experiences in transitioning from FBI to outside the government to those who are currently, interested in transitioning. I do want to put the caveat: our organization doesn't encourage intelligence analysts to leave. Rather, we're just trying to serve as a resource for those who are kind of seeking assistance. So hopefully we can provide some potential examples of career paths or how to use your analytical skills in the private sector or nonprofit world. So we're happy to answer some of those questions today based on feedback we received from members. And then we also did a LinkedIn poll recently. So hopefully we can cover where to start, applications and resumes, interviews and offers. So we got a lot to cover, 50 minutes to go. So with that, let's discuss. Ben, I want to start with you because you have a Substack dedicated for government folks looking to transition. And I think you have notated some steps to take. So someone has made that decision to transition. Where do they start?
There would be three things I would focus on in the beginning. One, just start. Don't just keep making a plan that you're going to start next Tuesday or next month or whenever sort of a milestone you hit. Just start doing it. Two, don't focus on your resume as much as polishing your elevator pitch, describing what you can do for a specific employer. And three, focus on your network. And there's two kinds of people to focus in your network. There's what I call a connector and then a trailblazer. A connector is somebody who's going to understand your specific background and how it would apply to the industry that you're targeting. And a trailblazer is going to be somebody who has made that transition that you are aspiring to do. So you can use them as a blueprint and understand what their process was like. There's going to be different things for you. Everyone's going to have their own unique experience, but there's going to be things that you can replicate so that you don't have to make some of those same mistakes, and you can build on their success. So start now. Don't worry about your resume, and focus on your network.
I love that. Just start. Mike, do you have something you want to add, especially as a former agent?
Yeah, I do. And I want to echo a point that Ben made. The networking part is really everything. People get you interviews, people connect you to things. And if you're starting out with, I don't know what to do, then your first phone call to a trusted contact is, I'm thinking about transition. Can you talk me through it? And you'll learn a lot through those conversations. And then every phone call that you have with someone should conclude with, can you give me a lead on someone else I can talk to and get another lead from someone? And then over time, those conversations should get more focused from, I'm thinking about leaving, to I know I want to leave and I want to do, let's say, consulting work for a big four firm on cybersecurity. Can you help me connect with organizations that do that? Or I know I want to work with a big four consulting firm. Do you have connections there that you can introduce me to? That's generally how I think you can have a lot of success. In addition to what Ben said about the different types of connectors, there are people that I call super connectors. They know a lot of people, and they in one phone call you can get connected to like 6 really good people who can then catapult you from there. And then the last thing, I had gotten this advice from 3 different people. It was create a top 10 list, and that top 10 list should be things such as how much money do you want or need to make? Where do you want to live? Do you want to travel? Do you want to grow a program, or do you want to just take over a program? What is it that you want to do? What industry? I had found that took me a lot of time to do. And then over the 2 years I had been thinking about going more seriously, I continued to refine that. And that helped me stay on track on opportunities that I wanted to pursue.
Great. Yeah. And I know, Nikki, I'll give you some time too, since we have a little bit, but I do want to, caveat, I know we're going to talk a lot about networking, but I think a lot of times we also reach out to folks that we know. Personally, I've reached out to folks that I don't know because sometimes you just never know. And especially if you want to pursue a different career path or something that perhaps you found passion in while you were in government that you want to pursue in the private sector. Sometimes people might not respond, but a lot of times they do. And it is helpful to cold call. You can certainly do that. Nikki, did you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I would say as part of the reaching out and connecting, leverage LinkedIn. That's what that platform is there for. Connect with former colleagues, connect with people who are in jobs that you think you might be interested in. I found that the more broad my network became, the more jobs popped up in my feed of jobs that I could potentially apply for, but also I learned a lot about different job descriptions and trying to figure out which ones applied best to being an intelligence professional. And also instances where there were jobs I'm like, oh, I can see a lot of parallel there with the skills that I have. And that's not a job title I ever would have identified on my own if I wasn't reading and reviewing and studying all these different job descriptions. And then the other thing I would add is don't be afraid to ask questions. If someone posts something on LinkedIn, they post a job and you think, or you don't understand what the job description is asking for, reach out and ask. That's the only way you're really going to be able to decipher the private sector language. Because this may surprise you. You thought there were acronyms in the government. There are more acronyms in the private sector, and not all of them are intuitive. And we're very well steeped in what the government speak. You're learning a new language when you come out to the private sector, and the only way you're going to decipher it is if you ask.
Great points, Nikki. I know you mentioned job descriptions, and it leads me to my next question, which is kind of related to resumes. So we all know government resumes often differ from private sector ones. Of course, reaching out to colleagues is a good step to kind of get input or advice. I know I've reached out to a few former colleagues when I was transitioning, but are there any good tools or, things that people can use, whether resume writers, perhaps recruiting companies, anything that you would recommend?
I think there's a few options. I did try using a resume writing company to take a look at my resume and see, how I can make it better. The challenge I found there was that if that individual or that company doesn't have experience working with people who've worked in government, they're not going to understand your resume or be able to help you tailor it. You're the only one who understands what your experience is and how it applies. So the government resume that you would have written for a government job is not the resume you're going to write for a private sector job. You have to figure out how to take that really unique, special experience that you had in the government, but make it understandable for someone in the private sector who you should assume knows nothing about what you did in government, who doesn't really care who you briefed or how important that person was or how important that project was. They want to get down to sort of like the brass tacks of what can you do for them and what do you bring to the table as it relates to the job that they posted. So you have to go back and look at your resume sort of with that mindset. And I've played around a little bit with using OpenAI and ChatGPT to help write cover letters. Take a swing at it using your resume. Like what things are in your resume, how, and ask the GPT to take a swing at it. And then you just have to, make it accurate and make it applicable to what you're doing. Leverage some technology to help you craft the resume that will get you where you want to be.
Thank you, Nikki. Ben, do you have more to add to that?
I would copy the resumes of people who are doing what you want to do. I don't mean like be false, but like how do they craft their experience that's similar to yours? It's usually not. It just seems you'll feel like you have to put a lot more effort in than you really do, and it can just be a red herring. Going back to my initial comment, I just wouldn't worry about your resume as much because people aren't going to understand it. They're going to get caught up in some of the things that you are trying to describe that add value, that you had an impact with national security. It's not going to be the same when you're trying to talk about a position in the private sector. So as quickly as possible, move beyond that. Accept the fact that people are going to be like, well, I don't understand how this is translatable. So then you can start to address that. This is why what I did can help your company accomplish XYZ.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, being in government and like serving the public, I think a lot of resumes are kind of geared towards, addressing national security matters. So these big, issues that are happening. But in the private sector, we're often thinking about the client, which is something that's not often mentioned in government. So kind of shifting that mindset a little bit to how do we serve clients. So with that, Mike, I do want to go to you for the next question about translating FBI or government skills into the private sector. So aside from, resumes, how do you kind of market yourself and what are the skills that are transferable?
Yeah, so one thing I do want to touch on resumes. Go on LinkedIn and find a resume, a job posting that you want, and mimic your resume to that job posting, because oftentimes you have to get through a screener. But as far as branding, a lot of people had told me, the private sector is not necessarily looking for an FBI agent or a CIA case officer. They're looking for, a security professional, and you do have to translate your skills for them. So for example, most companies, if you're going to do a security related job, are looking for like a cybersecurity analyst or a threat intelligence person or an insider risk or physical security crisis management. So you've all done these things, but you call it something different. And so you have to look at the language you're using and change the language that you're talking about. So I generally don't say I'm a counterintelligence person. I often talk about that I'm an IP protection person, right? Or that I can do, I protect. So our program, we don't call it insider risk. We call it internal trust and protection. It has a softer veneer to it, right? And I often use my time when we did visa vetting in CT as an example of how I could run a program that vets employees. So you're wanting to pivot. Almost the example I say is kind of write something or talk to someone like your mother, where you'd have to kind of water it down to their level so they understand. But I also want to make sure that you understand is your value to a company is your problem solving skills and your network. They may be hiring you to be a security person, but deep down, like your value, and they'll recognize this, is your network, your ability to solve problems. That's your real value to them, like once you get on board.
Absolutely. Ben, I believe you also have written about this, and I'd love to get your insight too on kind of transferable skills.
It's in the same way that Mike was talking about, that you don't use the terms that are going to distract people. Like if I was to, in a when you're dealing with behavioral interview questions, talk about some of the places that I served and even though it's like I'm not going to go into specifics, like a crisis that I was able to overcome. The minute I say Kirkuk or Bandung or Ulaanbaatar, people are going to stop listening to like the real details, and they're just going to be like, "Where's that place?" And they're not going to think about how can Ben be an added value to my company. So it's, again, putting it in terms that your interviewer, even if it's before the interview, when you're just trying to navigate your way into that interview loop, into terms that they can understand, and then some of it is also only going to come, unfortunately, by failure. And so you're going to be convinced that you've got the perfect pitch to convince somebody why you're good for this job or why you should be able to compete for it, and you're going to fall on your face. It's all right. You're going to get told no a lot. I get told no. I'm basically in sales now, and I get told no all the time, like in different ways. Just get used to it, and don't give up. That's like almost like after deciding you're going to start and you start, the second thing you want to commit to, don't quit and just keep going on, because it will work out.
I love it. Yes, absolutely. And I'd relate to what you're saying because, especially for some of our members who are, former IAs who are kind of looking to transition. Some folks are not necessarily interested in IA roles or intelligence roles. There's different avenues you can take, and you can apply those skills. I mean, critical thinking, we know, can be applied in any position. Writing, briefing can be applied in any position. And if those are skills that you kind of excelled in as an intelligence analyst, it's something that could, speak dividends in a private sector role. So moving on, so we went through the application process and resume. Next is interviews. So we know that government interviews and the application process is very different. So want to go through, what is the typical interview process like in the private sector? Nikki, we'll start with you.
It's long. Just be prepared that it's long. You will go through anywhere from, well, you'll probably meet with the HR person who will do all the pre-screening conversation. They'll want to ask you a little bit about your background. They'll want to know your geography. They'll probably ask you about your pay range. And then, I'll tell you all about the benefits and things that the company offers. From there, you'll probably meet with a panel of anywhere from 3 to 4 interviewers. And that will sometimes be all in the same day. So be prepared, drink lots of coffee. It's exhausting, so just be prepared for that. And then, you may, some places do things a little different. Maybe you meet with the hiring manager first. Maybe you meet with the hiring manager at the end. Maybe you meet with the hiring manager before and after. And then you'll wait. And you'll think that because in government, it can't possibly be as slow as government. You're wrong. It is as long as government. It's going to take time for them to get back to you. They're interviewing other people. So just prepare to be exhausted and waiting. But just know that eventually at the end of all that, you may or may not get some sort of response. You might get an automated email that says, "We're sorry, but we've decided to go with another candidate." Or you might actually get a real person who messages you back to say, "We're sorry, we've gone with another candidate." Or you'll move into the negotiation phase if you're offered the job. But I can't echo Ben enough by saying don't quit. You're going to hear no a lot. I can't even tell you how many times I was down to like the final 2 or 3 people for a job role and heard that, well, we're looking for someone with more private sector experience. And eventually you just find the right fit in the right place. I would say that keep in mind in this process, not only should you start and not quit, but know that this is probably not your last stop. This first job out of government isn't where you're going to spend the rest of your career. It's just not the way the private sector works. There's a variety of reasons. You might not have career progression. There might be restructuring in your company and your position is cut. You could just suddenly become unhappy in that role for any number of reasons it doesn't meet your life goals anymore. So just know that this first job isn't the end of the road. And going into it knowing that, I think makes the transition a little bit easier, makes you a little bit more open to the possibility of what skills you can develop in that role, and makes you keep thinking about what you want to do next. Because I think that's super important in the private sector, especially when you leave government. You may have no idea what to expect in your first role, but that first role will help you level set for where you want to be in your next role. And I think that's an important learning as you go through this entire process. You learn throughout the interview process, and then you learn again in that first job out of government.
Thank you, Nikki. Mike and Ben, I do want to get your perspective too. And if also you can add, if you've been on the other side being an interviewer, if you can provide some kind of, perspective to those who are going through that process. What does the interviewer think as well? So Mike, we'll start with you.
So I have been on the interviewing side of it, and basically there's two things we're looking for. We're trying to verify the competencies that we need for the job, right? So for me, if we're interviewing for a physical security person, we want to make sure that they have those skills. And then the other part is, I call it the jerk test. Can we work with this person? Is he or she likable? And that, I'll be honest with you, is the biggest part of these interviews. Most of the people, by the time they've gotten an interview, we feel pretty confident they have the competencies. It's really then, are you compatible with the rest of the team, and are you going to fit in? And then the last thing I will add in, this isn't so much about the interview. I've been able, at Micron, we use recruiters and they do a lot of the work for us. And I've had the recruiters let me into their systems to see how they find resumes for me. And that was very enlightening to me, because I tell the recruiter what I'm looking for, and then he or she goes and looks for it. But what all they're seeing is a job title that you've put in there, and a summary of what you've put in there. So if you don't put the right job title, the right summary, he or she's just going to pass you by. So when you're putting in those summaries for that application, make sure it mimics what the posting looks for. Otherwise, you're probably going to get skipped over, because a lot of people just rely on the recruiter. I've been fortunate where the recruiters let me into their systems, and I can see kind of who I want to pick.
Thank you. Yeah, Ben, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, what Mike talked about in terms of being able to work with a recruiter, you should make sure that you're cultivating relationships with recruiters to be part of your network. So, and not just the recruiter who's going to potentially be part of the decision. It's like recruiters that you meet along the way that you have a good connection with, stay in touch with them, because they will be able to give you feedback on your LinkedIn profile, on your resume, on your strategy for preparing for an interview, on executing an interview, what's happening during that quiet period when you're going crazy because they said they were going to get back in touch with you on Monday and now it's been 2 weeks. What to do when you actually get an offer. Having the insight of somebody who is hunting for candidates and trying to close candidates for a living is just going to be an added benefit and make you that much more effective when you get that first opportunity to jump, and then also further on in your career.
Yeah, great points. And I think, just to add to that, we talked about LinkedIn quite a bit, but just following those companies that you are interested in, engaging with posts on, with recruiters that kind of, sometimes recruiters post things that are, not necessarily a job posting, but just in general about the company. But engaging with that kind of gives you that name recognition, so that when they do see your name pop up for a certain role, you are kind of, already in the mix. So it definitely helps to start the engagement early. So we went through the interview process. Next is offers. This is kind of a hot topic for folks in government, because in the government and really nonprofit world, you kind of have an idea of what, the salary might be, whereas in the private sector, it's a little bit more nuanced. So how do you negotiate offers? Mike, we'll start with you.
So I think as you narrow down what you're looking to do, you need to be able to talk to people in that industry, friends or colleagues that are already there, to get a sense of what is pay and compensation like, so you can benchmark. In industry, they use compensation ratios to kind of make those offers. I haven't been able to find the compensation ratios online. I think that, if you could, it would make it a lot easier. but keep in mind, it's the total compensation. So companies often offer salary, bonuses, and potentially stocks or equity, and you have to take that in totality. Don't be so focused on the salary. Oftentimes, companies have very rigid accounting rules on salary and what they can do, but loosen up on bonus and stocks. So you kind of have to take the whole thing into account as you're negotiating or looking at those offers.
Great point. Nikki, do you want to add to that?
Sure, and actually I want to add a quick point on the last conversation as well, because I just thought of it. When you're interviewing, you will always be given the opportunity to ask the panelists questions. So if you're concerned that the panelist maybe doesn't fully understand your government career, or you just want to level set to make sure that it came across, like your skills came across, what I found helpful for me is I would always ask, is there anything in my background that is concerning to you? Or is there anything that I can explain? And they would often ask a question about, well, how does this apply? Or how did this work? Or something like that. So don't be afraid to sort of set up the question so that you can have the ready-made answer to really like hit home on what it is you want to be the key takeaway from that interview. I would say in terms of negotiation, I think talking to other people in the industry, kind of comparing notes, it was super important as I was going through the process. Don't underestimate your worth. I think that's also important, is when Mike says, think about what you need to earn, actually really think about it. And don't just like look at, well, I make this now as a GS, whatever it is. And well, if I got 10K more than that, I'd be happy. You're probably underselling yourself. So give a good thought about what you really think what your value is. And you'll notice that when you're going through the application process, there will be some companies that will ask you to list your current salary. Some make it optional. Some don't. If it's optional, don't put anything there because it may immediately exclude you from being considered if they think it's outside of their range. So, if you're thinking you're going to put a really big number and hope for the best, it could actually kick you out of the process. So if it's optional, I would say don't put it there. If it's required, put a really low number. You'll move through the process, at least get the rest of your resume looked at. And then that salary conversation can happen, when you're talking to the HR person and find out what their range generally is for that role. Do your research ahead of time. Understand what the difference is between stock options and restricted stock units, so that you can be better prepared to figure out what you want. Some companies will give you some options on how you can take your equity package. So do some research on that in advance, so you'll know how to navigate that. As Mike said, value the whole package, not just the salary, because it's your salary plus. So from the business end, your cost as an employee is your salary plus your equity plus your bonus plus your benefits and whatever extra benefits the company adds on, whether it's like, that they compensate you for like your gym membership or something like that. That is holistically what it costs the company to hire you. So there is some things you have no wiggle room with, some things you have a little bit more wiggle room, but just understand it's that whole number is what they're looking at when they're thinking about what it costs to employ you. And then focus in on the things that, and it doesn't hurt to ask. I think that's the other thing. It doesn't hurt to ask if there's something that you'd like to increase. I think one of the things I asked about in one of the very first conversations I had was about time off. If there was any wiggle room with the time off and how that worked, because there wasn't much else that I thought was available to move around. So the HR person will be pretty clear with you what can and can't be sort of changed. So don't be afraid to ask questions in that regard either.
A lot of great points, Nikki. Thank you. I did want to touch upon two things you said. One about underestimating. There's also the other side is overestimating. That could happen. It depends on, the interviewers and kind of the company. But I know I've seen where perhaps somebody might overestimate, where they want their salary to be based on the position that it is, and that might kick you out of kind of the interview process because it can be very competitive. And so if they have a few candidates in place and you kind of oversold by a lot, it can be hard to do that. So just be careful and just like Nikki said, do the research to kind of have an idea. And I also want to mention as far as benefits, one of the things folks often forget is there's multitude of benefits aside from just salary, and that includes remote work or hybrid work or childcare services, things that we often don't really think about in government, but they're available, especially for like large corporations. So, Ben, I wanted to go to you. I know you've written about this as well. Do you want to add to that?
I thought what Mike said in terms, well, and what Nikki repeated in terms of being able to focus on the total number, because you can, as Mike was pointing out, there could be fixed things in terms of what your base can be, but often you're able to get a sign-on bonus that could get you to that number that you're looking for, and always approach. I think we've moved beyond just receiving the offer, but potentially we're talking about how to counter the offer. You should always negotiate. And you should always negotiate in a way that is positive, because you are working with that recruiter or hiring manager to solve a problem together. And that problem, you don't even want to use the word problem. You are going to accomplish that mission, achieve that milestone by overcoming obstacles and figuring out that path in a collaborative environment. And when you speak that way, that's how it'll happen. If you even introduce any sort of like adversarial tone into it, it'll just work against you, and that's not what you want.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one thing I do want to touch upon that was one of the kind of feedback we received from members, since most of our members are former IAs or even IAs looking to transition. And Nikki, I'll start with you. And this is really kind of the type of roles that folks are looking to kind of apply to. If you can give any examples, and I know Mike, you talked about this about a bit, but like of job postings, what does it look like? Because it might not say, physical security or intelligence analysts. Can you give like a few examples of kind of what kind of roles are out there?
Sure. It's really diverse, actually. And it takes a little bit of understanding the job descriptions to whittle down what is going to be most applicable. You will see some intelligence, you will see the term intelligence used in a lot of job descriptions. It doesn't mean what we think it means. So that's the first thing you have to decipher is, are they using intelligence in a way that is the same definition that you are? And if not, is it still something that you feel like your skills would apply to? You'll see competitive intelligence and business intelligence. You won't be doing the kinds of assessments that you're potentially doing or used to doing. That's more of a understanding the competitive environment and what the company's competitors are up to in terms of timeline, activities, products. So it's very business driven. It helps if you have some kind of previous experience or can demonstrate previous experience in like business or marketing. There'll be financial analysts, which are actually listed typically as research analysts. So don't be fooled by that. It's not research like you would do it like Rand or somewhere else like that. It's actually more financial driven. Cyber threat intelligence is exactly that. So that's an easy one to decipher. The other one that is a little tricky is insider threat. For a lot of us, especially if you were primarily in a field office, you'll think of insider threat potentially as workplace violence. You might even see threat management, and you might think workplace violence. There is a component of that in those roles, but it is much more of an intellectual property protection type role. So data loss prevention, understanding how that software works and how to apply it in the space. And then you'll see a whole host of roles. Some will be threat analysts. Those can go either way. It might be physical threats. It might be cyber threats. You'll have to decipher that from the job description. There'll be global security operations center roles. Think of that as like the call center. If you worked in a field office, the desk gets a call and someone's reporting something, there might be a lot of alarms, signals, those sorts of badging issues, those kinds of things. And there's one other that I wanted to mention that is now escaping me. But as you can see, there's a diversity in the number of roles that might have an intelligence angle to them. Enterprise risk management, there's a lot of parallel there with what we've done as intelligence professionals. It really just comes down to doing sort of an inward look. What about your skill set do you want to keep doing? What things do you want to stop doing? And once you make that distinction, then targeting the right roles. Just because it sounds like a good fit, if you really look at the job description and you're like, oh yeah, I can do that job, but you're like, I could do that job, that's probably not the job you want to apply for. Like, if you're excited about doing the job, apply for that job, because it will come through in your interview if you're only half-heartedly excited about what the day-to-day activities look like. And they generally list that in the job description. It's usually pretty close to what the real job will look like, at least when you get there for the first maybe 2 or 3 months. And then you'll notice how it morphs from there.
Thanks, Nikki. Mike, do you want to add to that? And especially for any of our former agent listeners, I'm sure you get pinged from folks looking to transition.
Yeah, so to add on to what Nikki said, I mean, she's covered the security side of it like really well. But when I think at my company, where I think an analyst or a government worker could fit that's outside security, our procurement team does a lot of supply chain risk management, and the skills of an IA or an agent would really fit in well there. The other one that I've never heard other people talk about that I think is a great fit for government workers is government affairs. I mean, think about companies have people who, have to go talk to the government. You know how to do that sort of stuff. And you actually would be a great fit for that as well. Product security, oftentimes product security is sometimes separate from the security components because it's part of the team, the technology team. There's a fit there as well. And then the other thing I would say is just get on LinkedIn. And I mean, you guys are probably fantastic at this. Just throw in some words like analyst and risk and threat and see what jobs come back and read through them and see if there's anything that fits. And then the last part I would say is, unless you're going to do something like wildly different than you're already doing, there's really 3 buckets that I think we fit into. You're someone like me who's in a cost center who does security, or you're someone like Ben who works for a company who's selling a security or any product, doing business development. And then the third bucket is consulting, which is a little bit of a hybrid, right? You are doing consulting and you're doing business development depending on where you are. And so I think that might be a helpful starting point to figure out which bucket you want to fit into.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Ben, did you want to add to anything to that?
I thought that was a perfect summation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I will say, and I'm glad you mentioned government affairs, Mike, because I actually work with them quite a bit, and it's a role that I was, kind of interested in when I was trying to transition. And for me personally, I didn't transition into intelligence analyst role, and in fact, the role I originally got hired for, I'm no longer doing, and because I kind of presented my skill set inside the company to say, like, I'm a better fit for something like this. Think about that sometimes as well, that if you see an opportunity that perhaps, like, you know, you might like at the beginning, there's still opportunities to stay within the company, but maybe do something different. And aside from kind of government affairs, there's also like a policy. A lot of folks, especially around, I know Nikki mentioned cyber threat intelligence, but there's a lot of things going on cyber, and a lot of things related to kind of regulatory or government affairs, where you can apply those same skill sets. So we covered a lot. We're getting towards the end, but I do want to end with asking some questions about adjustments. So, you know, kind of adjustments that you've dealt with after switching from government to the private sector. What have you seen different, you know, and please, you know, include good and bad. I think that would be helpful to listeners. So Mike, we'll start with you and we'll go to Ben and Nikki as well.
I think the obvious thing is you're joining a new culture, and you kind of have to figure out the norms of that culture. But I found it was relatively easy. To me, it wasn't a big transition other than figuring out this is how this company operates. This is how this travel voucher works, right? All these new processes, right? And then trying to make sure that you're making friends, because oftentimes in the private sector it's a competition, right? And they may see you as a competitor, so making sure you come in humble and trying to be part of the team and add value. So for me, I didn't see it as a big deal. Maybe the other guests had saw it as a big transition, but for me, I thought it went really smooth.
Awesome. Okay, Ben.
I think one thing to prepare yourself for is people aren't going to respect what you did as much, and they're likely going to at first think that you're a government person who doesn't understand what a P&L is, like how to do things under time crunch, how to really demonstrate value, and they're completely wrong. And so just appreciate their lack of perspective and then prove them wrong graciously, as well as the fact that it sometimes helps, even though you want to be able to, like I said about a trailblazer, so you potentially want to be able to copy what other people have done. It can often be helpful if you are the only person with your background in a company, just because there won't be any associations with someone else. You'll be this curiosity, and you can really use that to your benefit, to demonstrate why what you did before is completely applicable, and also a differentiator to your new employer and your new role.
Awesome. Nikki?
So everything that Mike and Ben just said, and also just, I guess, go into it with your eyes wide open. There will be, I didn't find that it was very challenging to transition either, but there are things you're going to miss about the job, the old job. You're not going to see a case through to an end. Not everything you work on is going to result in a prosecution. Most things actually won't result in any sort of legal outcome. And you have to be okay with that. You also have to be okay with not having access to all the information you had when you were in the government. And there will be a lot of times that you're staring at your computer going, how am I going to get to this answer just using open source intelligence? I know that if I had access to X, Y, or Z other thing, I could, come up with a better profile. It's fine. This is your new role. This is what you have access to. It's all going to be okay. You just have to go into that, like, understanding it. I would also say that it's probably good if you let people ask you about your previous career than always telling stories about when you were in the government, because that's a quick turnoff. I've seen that happen in meetings before, and I'm like, and I wish I could, like, it was an in-person meeting and maybe I could nudge the other person that, like, that too many stories. It's time to pull it back. And I would say there's a bit of uncertainty. In government, I think the biggest challenge for us while we're in government is worrying about a government shutdown. But most of the time, even if there's a government shutdown, you're going to get the back pay, and things are eventually going to be okay. But in the private sector, if the company you're working for is having a financial struggle or in a financially difficult situation, or the economy isn't doing well, there's uncertainty with that. pay attention to the quarterly earnings calls, understand what makes the business work, understand what that might mean for you and your space, because that does have trickle down impact. And I think that uncertainty can catch some people off guard, and it's good to just know that going in, that you don't have the same job security as you did in the government. You have to be okay with that when you come out of government, and know that there's that potential for there to be disruption in your life, and for you to be looking for a new job without really planning to be looking for a new job. I think that's an important thing to call out. But otherwise, you'll be remarkably surprised at how similar it is in the private sector as compared to what you were doing in government. And you really won't feel as many growing pains as maybe you think you will.
Great, helpful points. And I would add, it's also a small world, and you might end up working with former colleagues, or, perhaps, I don't know how many meetings I attend and I find somebody, former FBI, in a meeting. And also, just think about one thing for me personally, like one thing I enjoyed at the FBI was being able to volunteer for community outreach events, kind of be in the community. It's something I thought I would actually adjust to in the private sector, and something I wouldn't have an opportunity. But actually, working at Citibank, as an example, they offer another benefit, which is giving community service hours per year. And so recently I participated in 9/11 events. So there's opportunities to give back, and you're still serving the public. It can be an adjustment from government. So thank you all for this insight. So I do want to end with kind of last words of wisdom. Anything you want to give as takeaways to our viewers? I know a lot of folks are going to listen to this later. So any 1 to 3 tidbits that you want to give away? Mike, we'll start with you.
I think the most important thing, and I think my colleagues will echo this, is spend most of your time on the networking and talking to people. Don't worry so much about the resume. It's really, people will get you opportunities. So just talk to people.
Thank you. Ben?
Mike said it perfectly. The best outcome when you're trying to find that next job is somebody that says, I have a perfect opportunity for you, and I'm going to connect you with this person to talk about it. That's so much better than every other approach.
Love it. And Nikki?
Take the time to look inward and figure out what you want to do next. Don't just jump at the first opportunity that comes your way. Really think about what it is that you want to do. What skills do you want to highlight? What kind of a company do you want to work for? What kind of a role would you like to be in? If you do all that pre-work and really do that self-reflection, your struggle to find the right kinds of jobs to apply for will be less, and you'll be less frustrated with the process, and you'll be able to just start. So really know going into it, have an idea. It doesn't have to be a perfect outline, but rather than just like shooting arrows all over the place, really take the time to figure out what it is you're trying to target.
Awesome. Yeah. And I would add, be patient and persistent. Being patient, that it does take time, as all of our panelists have said, but also persistent in networking, doing the research, and looking into different opportunities that might help you. So with that, I do want to conclude. Thank you all for being on this panel today. I really appreciate it. A lot of helpful insight and tips. So we will have a recording of this for all of our members, and I believe we will also have some snippets to promote on LinkedIn. But separately, a side project, we're going to work on perhaps a one-pager or something that we will share with members to include some of the tips that were offered today, because I think there's a lot to take away. And for those who are looking to transition, just start, as Ben said. And speaking of Ben has a Substack as well as a Gumroad, and he put in, we put in the chat, he's offering a 50% discount on his Substack and Gumroad if you'd like to subscribe. A lot of helpful tips. I read them myself, and I found a lot of useful information on there. So thank you, Ben, on that. With that, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and we'll see you at our next event.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.